It all started with a question in the middle of 2016. Why there are so little women in data and tech? Me and my male co-founder Pavel, we were discussing this, and we decided to organize an event for women only to teach them about tech and data, to inspire them to learn more. We had no idea how many women would register, but we were thinking it's going to be maybe 30 of them. We had 500 of them at the end, and we couldn't find a bigger room than 110 women, which we squeezed in there and started the session. We called it a Data Girls. When we came to Australia a few months later, our partners have already heard of this event, and they asked us, why don't you do it here? And we were quite surprised. Why would we do such an event in Australia? Isn't equality in tech already existing here? The question and then demand of those courses that we've set up showed us otherwise. It was very interesting that this movement was never actually planned as something from the beginning to start a global movement. But what we did, everywhere we went, we organized the event, and we found local volunteers who helped us to run it. In the beginning, the very first year, it was just me and Pavel organizing it together with our first help, Eva, who is now running the Sydney chapter. 4 years later, we do have close to 120 volunteers in 16 countries around the world, and we taught over 8,500 women about data and tech, but as well about some soft skills and about digital marketing. We do have plans to open in Middle East and North Africa in the next month. We are opening and planning chapter in India and other places. This movement would not exist without the incredible help of individuals, our volunteers, our instructors, people who helped us on our way, and our partners. So celebrating the 4 years now is a great moment for all of us who helped us to empower women around the world. With She Loves Data, we empower women with knowledge about the data, technology, and digital literacy. Check us out and join us. We would love to see you in our online and hopefully soon offline events close to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pat, and on behalf of She Loves Data, I'd like to welcome you today to the first of 2 webinars sponsored by Informatica, where we will be focusing on courageous leadership. So sit back, relax. If you have a pen and a notebook, that would be great with some tea. You'll have an hour and a half of useful tips from all our fantastic speakers. But before then, let me please share with you what She Loves Data is all about. Yeah, so who is She Loves Data? We've been around since October 2016, and we were founded in Singapore. The 3 things to remember about us: we are on a mission to encourage more women to pursue careers in data and technology and help them get ready for the future of jobs. The second thing is we are focusing on activities that deal with diversity, data, and digital literacy. And this is one such activity. We conduct free workshops, meetups, and webinars for women. The third thing to remember about us is we are all about community and sisterhood. And through this sisterhood, through our vast local and global networks, we encourage our data tribes to learn together, support each other, and coach future female leaders. And obviously, this this wonderful message resonates. We are now in 17 chapters across the world, and we are in 5 years. That's really fantastic. So we hope to be able to bring more of these events to you. As mentioned, our key activities are around technical training workshops, which are mostly free, supported by our partners. We have meetups, we focus on soft skills and digital marketing skills as well. Now for today, we are really asking the question why we need courage in these interesting times. And that would be followed up by a fantastic workshop conducted by happiness scientists with their founder, Shan Yo. So here we'll be learning about how to reframe our thought barriers to courage. But just a few reminders. Please, if you have any questions addressed to the panelists, just type it down on the Q&A chat box. And if it's anything related to technical difficulties, you can type it in the chat box. All right? So we have a really packed session. And I just would like to say thank you again to our sponsor, Informatica, and to our workshop partner, Happiness Scientists. Without further ado, let's start the panel. For today, we may not be able to entertain Q&A about the panel, but please do keep on typing them in the box so that we can address them. We'll have our panelists address them in the follow-up email. All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Yana from She Loves Data, and I have a pleasure to introduce our panelists, Tracy and Dr. Tanvi. We changed the narrative a little bit and we let them introduce each other. Please, Tracy, starting with you.
Thank you, Yana. Very pleased to be back with She Loves Data. I'm Tracy and I cover marketing for Informatica, Asia Pacific and Japan. Really excited to have Dr. Tanvi with us. Dr. Tanvi is very close to my heart because she's my mentor, my coach, my teacher when I understudy with her for the Global Women and Leadership Program at SMU a few years back. And the reason why we are doing this today because she's given me the courage to kickstart women in data leadership. Dr. Tanvi is a regular C-suite visitor, multi-award winning speaker, best-selling author, transformational leadership consultant, and top 10 HR influencer. She serves on various boards and frequently being quoted in multiple publications. It's our honor and privilege to have Dr. Tanvi here today.
Well, thank you for that, Tracy, for a rather very generous introduction. And yes, Tracy and I first met in my Global Women and Leadership Program. And I can tell you, we've been running that program for 10 decades. And once in a while, you meet somebody like Tracy. Because Tracy not only attended the program, she is a great example of applying it. Not only is she a champion for women in tech, but with the work she's been doing in women in data, I find inspiration to go on when I see women like her stepping up and helping raise the tide. So that's Tracy for you.
And we can only confirm that because we've been working with Tracy for a while, and it's great to actually have you back here in She Loves Data webinar. Dr. Tanvi, let me start with you and let me read that. Studies say that 65% of working women let go of their ambition, either temporarily or permanently. And this is just because of the pandemic. But McKinsey study also shows that we start with 47% of women at entry level, but only very few actually reach the C level. Now, this number is even now expected to go down. What do we do? And what is happening? Are women giving up? How is this actually affecting the entire pipeline of future female leaders? What is your take on that?
Well, the short answer is yes, women are giving up. And I'm not sure whether it has as much to do with ambition as it has to do with what's happening in the world at the moment with the pandemic and the speed at which companies are not doing anything to make it more friendly for the women. I can tell you that even with the senior level executive women that I coach, a lot of them are finding it difficult to voice to their colleagues or their leaders as to, what are the, the flexibility or the situation they are facing in their own homes at the moment, because there is a huge fear that, even pre-pandemic, there was a fear of being judged for your caregiving or the fact that you had other responsibilities. And now it's even more exaggerated, right? Because there's a real shadow of, financial risk. Layoffs are happening in a lot of places, and that is also a consideration for women. So I think this, fear of being judged negatively, always being on culture, a lot of people not respecting boundaries, texting weekends, all of this is piling on. So, I mean, I'm not surprised that they're giving up. But, normally if we were having this conversation pre-pandemic, I would be the first one saying, come on, and you've got to do this. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the case right at the moment. I think it's the systems that are failing women, whether it comes to managing performance review expectations or adjusting measures of productivity in the workplace. I don't see enough happening to support women. So yes, this is going to impact the pipeline.
So what can we do? I mean, Tracy, you have been championing female leadership, and you've been, very vocal about the support you're giving to women. But what can businesses and communities like She Loves Data, what can we do to get more women into tech, and not only get them there, but, let them stay and grow their career path so they can actually make it to the top management?
Sure. And bring this question a bit closer to home. In Southeast Asia, the proportion of women working in tech is higher than the global average, and in fact ahead of more mature countries such as US and UK. Women account for 32% of Southeast Asia tech workforce compared to the global average of 28%, according to a recent report by BCG and Singapore Infocom Media Authority in 2020, late last year. And some ways that I think it's possible for us to even take baby steps as for those of us in corporate. And also the first thing would be to start them from young. Tech companies can collaborate with schools and non-government organizations to target girls, including those from underprivileged groups, and we've seen large organizations have already started doing that. We encourage the youngest to explore the world of tech, pursue an education in the area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Secondly, we could get more women to take up a career in tech. Also, for companies to recognize, right, that there is equitable recruitment and pay when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and an inclusive culture that drives retention and also upward movement of women, promoting to the mid-level, promoting to the senior level, promoting finally to even the highest level. We do see a few, or in fact, we see Fortune top 100, right, of those powerful women CEOs. Organizations need to take a deliberate step to pave the way for more gender diverse and inclusive future. For us at Informatica, our CEO this year deliberately make a mandate that every interview needs to have women as interviewees. And today, our percentage is now about 30% of the total workforce within my organization that is female, and it's still a big effort. In fact, we just recruited another women leader to our board of directors as well.
It's fantastic. I'm actually glad to see in the last few years that the numbers are changing and we see more positive results and more female role models to take important positions in the organizations. What important topic is coming back in terms of leadership is being a daring, brave, and courageous leader. And if I'm reading a Brené Brown book right now, and she says that our ability to be daring leaders will never be greater than our capacity for vulnerability, because vulnerability is having courage to show up when we cannot control some situation. And I actually, when I read that, I wish that someone told me this 25 years ago when I was like stepping up, on my career, and I was starting, step by step, having more and more responsibilities, because I felt like I am not ready for those roles, that I am having a completely different style than my male colleagues. And I had a career in tech, and it was scary. And I did not dare to be myself. So my question to both of you is, how does vulnerability, but as well courage, fit in? And how do we naturally fit it into leadership? What is your advice, to all the future female leaders? And not only female, we need it on both sides. Tracy.
Sure. Well, revealing vulnerability, we need courage for that, because revealing that you're vulnerable to employers means you're human, just like them. We make mistakes. We have to clean up after them. And also being vulnerable also shows what it's like to be in their shoes, and that we don't have a massive ego. Today, I would say that in such turbulent times, we are faced with seemingly intractable challenges and great demand for innovation. And also, our current cultural norms within organizations can corrode trust and courage. Today at organizations, leaders dabble with critical thinking, building trust, rethinking system, portraying empathy to relationship building. However, not many have actually looked into being vulnerable, the importance and the impact of it. I'm going to cite an example, and if when I cite this example, you're gonna, yeah, I know this story, right? We read the downside of failing to be vulnerable by showing empathy of this physician when he was dragged off a United Airlines flight that he paid for, and it took the UA CEO 3 times in his public response before he even showed any empathy, right? And that episode has marked that airline brand and media calling it one of the worst corporate giraffes ever. Just citing an example, the price that even an organization has to pay by not being open and being vulnerable to say, hey, we are sorry, we don't mean that this thing happened, we want to make sure this will not happen again. And because men and women are wired differently, it's probably easier, to bring out a female's vulnerability with grit and grace compared to a male.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. That's as well the way how we are facing failures, right? And they say that vulnerability and innovation goes as well hand in hand. Dr. Tanvi.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite authors is Seth Godin. And Seth Godin often says, if it can't fail, it doesn't count. So if you're doing something that's very, very safe, you probably are not leading, you're probably not rocking the boat, you're probably not going to go anywhere. I mean, you mentioned about, when you were in the corporate world and you were like, oh, am I ready for the next role? And this is a conversation I have with countless women. You will be surprised. Some of whom very senior women who, even after becoming an MD, are like, oh, am I cut out to be a VP at being VP? Am I cut out to be an SVP? And, whenever I'm coaching them, if I'm coaching someone who's an MD to be a vice president, I actually imagine herself to be a CEO. I'm like, let's just cut to the chase. I want you to reach for the highest ambition that you can have for yourself, scary as that is. But if you can imagine being the CEO, maybe we can get you to the VP level a little bit faster than you had thought. So I think courage does require stepping into the unknown, as you said. But, as is often said, everything that's worth striving for lies on the other side of fear. And I am very, very certain that, any man or woman who has ever achieved anything in their life is because they felt the fear and went for it anyway. And I think what starts happening after a while is, and now I have done this so many times, that when fear shows up, I acknowledge it, but I don't allow it to stop me, because if I did, I would not be doing anything. So I think part of it is also normalizing it, saying that, yeah, and you're not the only one. You'll be surprised. You're not the only one. But I also agree with what Tracy was saying, that I think leaders who are not showing vulnerability, particularly in the time of pandemic, are coming across as tone deaf. They are not the people leaders. They are what I would say leaders by title, not by practice. Because at this point in time, when people are dealing with grief, people are dealing with burnout, people are dealing with loss and uncertainty, your number one job as a leader is to be present to some of these things versus, here's the target, here's the review, and to keep going. And I think it's a very welcome shift. And I'm hoping very much that empathy and vulnerability as corporate values will stay much beyond after the pandemic is over, which I hope will be over soon.
Definitely. I can agree more with you. But let's look at it practically, because yes, we need more courageous and vulnerable leaders. But how does that look like in a reality? Have your courage has been challenged throughout your career? And have you been put on spot where you actually had to overcome it? What did you do? Practically, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is very hard at any given point in time. Courage is about, owning your power versus owning your fears. It's quite simple as that. I'll tell you what allows me to carry on. It is having a very clear sense of purpose and vision for what do I stand for as a leader, and who will lose out if I am not courageous. We tend to think about courage as something that is very personal. And of course it is, because you're the one who has to act in courage. But what I try and remember is that every time one woman steps into her courage zone, it inspires 100 others to step into their courage zone, right? And I am a very firm believer in that you have to see it to be it, right? And so for me, it's always about, how do I push myself? How can I just sit through that discomfort? So let me give you an example. I was leading a global project of more than 25 individuals. And, the previous leaders we've had who've led this project have had a very single model: higher, faster, better, bigger. It was the bragging rights, right? How much bigger can we make this thing? And then when I inherited the project, I went to one of the senior members of the organization and I said, this year is not going to be the bigger, better, larger. That's not my metric. My metric is very simple. Nobody on my team will be burnt out in this process. And he just looked at me. He just stopped what he was doing. He looked at me. He's like, you realize you're going against like decades of what has been the culture of this place. It's never been done before. And I said, yes, we've never even had a pandemic before. So this is the metric I'm setting for myself. And what surprised me was the amount of support I got for it. So I think sometimes when we want to step into our courage zone, this idea of what will others think and do hold us back. But when we go there, we find somebody was waiting for somebody else to do it, and it had to be you. And support starts coming in. So, do what is true to your vision and purpose and values, and the support will show up. You'll be surprised.
I love this example. And it reminds me of the patriarchy that we are dealing with in the leadership. And we women, we feel like that we have to adopt this type of style to lead, to be successful. And having courage to be authentic to yourself, as you rightly showed in that particular situation, is amazing. Tracy,
Sure.
We know that courage cannot be taught. Can be taught. It's not in our DNA, actually, vice versa. How do we learn it? And what are the situations that we actually obtain this characteristic or, this ability to lead with courage?
Sure, actually, I have a very good example of my own. I want to just add on to what Dr. Tanvi has shared. How can it be taught? You will know when the opportunity comes. For you, if you hold a position of influence, of power, it's up to you if you choose to step up. And one side example, I took the risk and spoke up to top management by putting people first. I told the top management, you cannot, just go about, removing people from their jobs, reorg, and do this at your whims and fancies, right? We see that a lot in large MNCs. And I told the board, fear does not bring about passion. Without passion, it's not possible to drive the desired growth in the organization. And it was really interesting because I've got my peers of bigger titles than me in the boardroom. Head of HR was there, and suddenly I'm the only one in the room. The rest have just dissolved, in the face of the earth. And I have the board against me because they are the board. Who am I, right? I'm probably the smallest fry in that room. And that moment, I felt I just needed to pluck out my courage for such a time as this. Secondly, what does it mean for me? Yes, my job is at stake because it's like, all right, that's it. She's not for us. She's against us. Then she can walk out of the room, right? And I want to say that at that moment in time, I just felt I need to pluck out that courage. You know it at that moment, because if you don't speak up, that will not eradicate and bring about a better good for the rest of the organization. And I'm pretty pleased to say that they have taken back that decision, though they didn't come back and say, I think what you said makes sense. And the best part is when I step out of the room, I've got my peers like, well done, Tracy. That's exactly. I'm like, where were you guys when I needed? Yeah, I second that, right? So in a way, this is just an example in terms of don't let fear stop you. When the moment comes, be brave and speak up. There's nothing to lose, but a bigger good that you're going to gain and impact a larger community.
So it's being courageous and to be basically true to who we are, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The authentic leadership.
Yes.
That we need in those situations.
Absolutely.
Who are your role models? And it can be male and female. Who are daring, courageous leaders? Dr. Tanvi.
I said earlier that for me, a lot of it has to do with, you have to see it to be it, right? And a lot of work is being done around intersectionality of women and the fact that, women can have it tough and women of color can also have it a little bit tougher. And so for me, the two that there's so many, but I think the two which who I want to highlight, one is Ursula Burns, who was the first African-American CEO of Xerox. I think she came from a very humble background, and she was in that role when most people would not even imagine a woman being in the role, forget a Black woman being in the role. I mean, you can imagine the courage it would take almost every day to be who she was. And the other one is Veena Nair, who's the Chief HR Officer of the Unilever Group. And she's the first South Asian to be on the global board of Unilever. And I admire her not just for, the fact that she's, reached excellence in her profession, but she has never forgotten where she came from. And her approach is very similar to mine, which is, you reached a particular goal or you got a particular accolade or a position. Whose life changed because of that? And if the answer is that it's only your life that changed because of that, well, that's a rather sad situation because, it's always about paying it forward. And, she's one of those very humble leaders who has never forgotten how people helped her and how she can help other people. And that's what really inspires me about her.
That's fantastic. I think it's so true. Pay it forward is so important, and especially in, when we're focusing on helping future female leaders, pay it forward. That's the mantra. Tracy.
Well, for me, I would like to first of all cite a male leader. Is our founding father of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. And I remember when he passed on that year, I was buying flowers. There was this lady in front of me, and then she bought the flowers. She walked off. It's my turn. And the florist told me that this lady goes to her every day to buy flowers. I'm like, wow, right? And she said she's a cleaner. I'm like, yeah, how much will she earn? That means whatever she earns that day, she buy the flowers for our late founding father. And that set me thinking, if she's a cleaner, how would a head of a nation impact on her? She apply leave that day to go visit, the memorial services. That means she's not paid that day. There must be that intrinsic or extrinsic value of that leadership that has impacted on this lady who's willing to give up and not earn money that day and even take out from her savings to pay respect. I believe that he is truly a leader who has taken courage, and yet he's able to impact lives and people of all levels. Hats off to our founding father, for our nation. Another role model, I would say that Mother Teresa, she uses vulnerability, transparency, sincerity very well. Her meekness commands world respect. She uses her vulnerability to help the vulnerables, the outcasts, and minorities. And I always held her in high regard when I borrowed the first book from the library that was about Mother Teresa. That has always been my role model, life role model.
Fantastic. I love that. Very good examples. And I'm glad that we had a one male leader, because I think daring leaders and the courage, vulnerability, we all need it, no matter what gender we are. Let's close this discussion with one sentence or one word that represents for you a daring leadership or leading bravely. What is it we should remind ourselves, in a day-to-day struggle? And if we want to give up and say, no, let's not bother, let's not go there first as a leader and test it out for our teams. What is it for you that you would like to tell our audience what represents the daring leadership? Dr. Tanvi?
It's one of my favorite quotes about daring leadership is that it doesn't become easier, you become better. And I have lived through that. I want everybody who's listening right now to think about, a few of the top fears that they had, that they, broke through. And what you will realize is that it's, it takes one act of breaking through to realize, it could be done, or that it was completely, unwarranted, the kind of fear that you had. You can't think your way to fear. You have to do your way through fear. And with every step that you take, that courage muscle becomes stronger. So, and the other thing is also that courage is not always about, world shattering things or, flying into the face of, rescuing a baby from the burning fire. We all think of courage always in those terms. Courage sometimes is, like Tracy was saying, somebody else raising a hand up and saying, I support her idea, right? That's an act of courage. Courage can also be, you know what? I will try again. That is also courage. And simply going to bed at night and saying, tomorrow is another day, is also an act of courage. So I don't want courage to be this, big, massive, win a Nobel Peace Prize for something. You are all courageous. I want you to recognize moments of courage in your life much more than you are doing right now.
Very well said. Tracy?
Sure. Well, I would like to sum it up by saying courage takes you to a whole new level to experience breakthrough and successes. You do not know how much you can achieve until you are brave enough to take the risk. And the information in your head has to move with your heart to pluck up that courage and act it out through your hands to bring about that transformation. Be that leader of the 21st century and beyond. It just takes yourself. Take the first step and be courageous.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can beautifully close down our discussion and move on to the next step in today's program. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Dr. Tanvi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the panelists for that wonderful discussion. Before I go on to share with my segment, I'd like to engage all of you on the chat. So please, can you go to the chat box and type in a word to describe how you feel after watching that discussion between our panelists? please type it into the chat box. I'd like to know how you feel. I'm feeling all kinds of emotions, but I'd love to hear from you. Wow, inspired, hope, empowered, confident, inspired, motivated. Wow, so many words. Hopeful, positive, fantastic, willing. You know how many times I was nodding through the panelists, and every single thing that they said, I wanted to write it down because they were all golden nuggets. So once again, thank you to our panelists. I'm very grateful today to be invited to share about leading bravely in a sea of change. Before I jump into the topic proper, I just want to set a bit of context before we get started. Now, we all know what we have been living through. The impact of COVID-19 on women has been profound. In fact, in a recent McKinsey report in July 2020, they talked about three main impacts that COVID-19 has had on women. The first is that more women have lost their jobs or have experienced pay cuts. The second, more women are in frontline jobs, whether it's in the hospitals, whether it's in education, and this has led to more stress and also more exposure to the COVID-19. The third one, women have had to bear a larger proportion of the child caring and education duties at home. And it's not that men aren't chipping in, but it's still majority, in fact, almost about 65% of the duties of child caring and managing the house still fall on women, the so-called second shift. And as a result of all this, we may be feeling a lack of confidence. Some of us may have had our ambition feel dented. Can we still do what we want to do? Can we still dream of the things that we want? And for some of us, our physical and mental health has been affected. The panelists talked about burnout. Some of us have felt difficulty because we are feeling fatigued from the long drawn effects of the pandemic. In fact, I'd love to read to you a letter, or an email rather, that I printed out, so I call it a letter. It was sent to me by one of my webinar participants. And the letter goes, "Dear Shan, I attended your webinar recently and I would like to seek your advice. I'm in a good job that most people would agree is also well paying, but I feel very drained and tired. Due to COVID, things have gotten worse from last year. I find myself working nonstop, constantly feeling worried. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night. My boss recently changed and I constantly worry that I'm not doing enough. I'm in my mid-40s. I have 2 kids. I want to quit, but I'm not sure if I can find another job. I don't feel confident if I were to change industries as well. Is there really light at the end of the tunnel?" Now, I'm reading this letter not to make us all feel worse than some of us might already feel, but I think it's that last question that may be lingering at the back of our minds. Is there really light at the end of the tunnel? Along with that, can we still dare to dream? Can we still achieve the goals that we wanted to? Can we still thrive despite these challenges? And I think the answer to that is, when I thought about all the women who have sent emails to me, whether it's on social media and things like that, I think the answer to that is yes. And after hearing the panel, I, just like all of you, feel inspired and empowered. And really, these questions were genesis of the reason why we're doing this series, the Thriving Women Leadership Series. Today is the first part that we're going to start off with, which is about how we can lead bravely, identifying the thought barriers that get in our way, and then how we can flex our courage muscles in order for us to be able to face the challenges that we have in front of us. And because we don't want it to just be for you to come here and get the strategies and leave, we really want it to be something that's sustainable. So what we've planned a couple of weeks from today is the start of Courage Circles. And Courage Circles are really safe spaces where we'll come together to process some of our reflections, because at the end of today, we will be giving you a little bit of things to discuss. And when we go into the Courage Circles, we will have protected time and space for us to be able to share, to be able to be in the company of like-minded women. And then in the next webinar, we'll be talking about rising strong and thriving forward. How can we leverage our strengths? How can we go to the heart of what matters? And how can we begin to write a story for ourselves that we can resonate? Dr. Tanvi talked a lot about visualize yourself way higher than you are. How do we even begin to write that story? And then we'll end off the series by having another courage circle where we will bring you together again to have reflections after our second webinar. Now, if this sounds exciting to you, I would love for you to type it into the chat. Exciting! Before I share with you what we're really going to be covering in the webinar today. Awesome, thank you. I really love it too. And I'm really, really thankful to the team. We have worked very hard behind the scenes to put together a very interesting program. And of course, that sustainability. Sometimes we don't hold ourselves accountable as well as we want to. We have the intention, but it's nothing like having a community like She Loves Data, Informatica, all of us coming together to support each other. All right, so let's bring it on. Exciting, amazing. This is what we are going to be covering in the webinar today. Okay, I want to talk about things, first of all, from the psychological perspective. What are we really experiencing? And then we want to talk about what is it we need. The word of what we need has been mentioned many, many times through the panel, so it probably won't come as a surprise. And then we want to be realistic and talk about what's getting in our way, because only when we know what's getting in our way, do we know how to tackle it with the right strategies. And last of all, we're going to end off with the practical meat from today's session. How do we overcome what's getting in our way? So let's begin with what we are experiencing. Well, psychologically speaking, it kind of feels like this dog. COVID-19, the changes as a result of COVID-19 landed on our lap without us even knowing it was going to come. We didn't ask for it, we didn't plan for it, but it landed in our lap. And just like this dog who seems reluctant to follow his owner wherever he's bringing him, we feel the same way. Many people ask me when I conduct my webinars, or even some of my clients, Shan, why is change so hard? We go through change all the time, but why is this change so difficult? Well, one of the reasons is that we interpret change as a threat. In our brain, there's a part in our brain called the amygdala, which is the emotional control center. It guards and protects us. So when it senses a threat, it constricts and allows us to go into fight or flight mode, right? And when we constrict, the only thing that we are responding to is the change, which we interpret as a threat. And that makes us feel fearful. When we are fearful, we want to flee, withdraw. Some of us have probably felt that way, or some of us want to fight. And why is this a threat? What is it a threat to? The threat to our familiarity, our comfort zone, the habits that we have been building up, our lifestyle. The fact that we used to be able to just go out and meet someone face to face suddenly became such a laborious thing or wasn't able to happen at all. So psychologically speaking, we are feeling a very strong resistance to change. We are feeling fear. And when we feel this fear, it makes us feel vulnerable. Now, vulnerability was mentioned a lot in the panel earlier, and most of the time, vulnerability is seen as a weakness. And we'll talk a little bit about what it actually is in a minute. But when we're vulnerable, maybe this is what it feels like for us on the inside. As we observe the multiple changes in our environment, maybe inside we're feeling all kinds of competing emotions. On some days we feel tense, nervous, stress. On other days we may feel relief, joy, excitement, all kinds of emotions. It's no wonder that the definition of vulnerability is the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to lay ahead of us. We try to plan, but we still don't know what's going to come. Vulnerability is also the emotion that we experience when in times of risk. I love Tracy's story about taking the risk. At that moment, it feels so vulnerable. But what if we don't do it? That element of risk is something that we always have to contend with. And last of all, it is also the emotion when we experience emotional exposure. And the last one, emotional exposure, is probably the one that maybe we fear the most, because many of us sometimes tuck our emotions away. We are not supposed to reveal how we feel, or at least that's what we're told. We're not supposed to tell people that we're scared because we're supposed to appear confident as leaders. We're supposed to know everything as leaders. At least that's what we hear we're supposed to do. And so when we feel vulnerable and we perceive that we are going to have to expose our emotions, all of a sudden, vulnerability feels like a weakness. Because I guess in the field of data, it probably is, right? If we have a vulnerability in our system, that is weakness. So we have come to equate vulnerability to weakness. But I think by now, after hearing the panel, you have probably understood that this is a myth. Instead, let me tell you the truth. Now, Brené Brown was referenced many times, and she is a researcher in the area of vulnerability, shame, daring leadership, and courage. And her definition of vulnerability is way more empowering. She says this: vulnerability is the courage to show up, even when we can't control the outcome. And the truth is, in the last 1.5 years, there have been so many things that we have not been able to control. But every day, like Dr. Tanvi says, it's a new day. We show up. In the small things, we show up. Many of you signed up to be here today. You showed up. Vulnerability is the courage to show up. So now that you know what we are experiencing from the psychological perspective, to answer the question, what do we need? It is courage. But let's look to the definition of what courage is. Now, the root of courage is the Latin cor, C-O-R, which means heart. Tracy talked about being true to ourselves. Taking courage, Dr. Tanvi talked about, something that matters to us, our purpose. The definition of courage that Brené Brown talks about is telling the story of who you are with your whole heart. And that, even just saying that, may make some of us feel, can I really tell my story? Can I really bring my heart into my leadership? So today, as we go through the strategies, I want to empower you with the strategies to be able to do so. How can we bring forth the courage so that we can continue to thrive in this new normal? But before we get to the strategies, let's talk about the reality. In the panel, we talked about the systemic challenges that women face on a day-to-day basis. We also talked about some of our own personal challenges. And for the scope of today's workshop, I really want to focus on our mental, emotional barriers that we are experiencing that sometimes get in our way of being able to show up. Okay, so what's really getting in our way? There are 3 key things. So the first one, anybody want to guess what this is? If you want to guess, just type it into the chat box, right? But here we are standing there trying to do the power pose. But the only thing that we can experience, or the only thing that we are experiencing, yes, Nicole, absolutely, is fear. You see at the back of our minds, some of us are overwhelmed by fears. I'm not saying that you should feel bad about it, but let's understand first of all what fear is. Fear is simply an emotion in response to perceived threat or danger. In some way, fear is protecting us. However, should that fear get out of control or exist in our life too permanently or too chronically, that fear can lead to debilitation. What are the fears that we're talking about? They were mentioned quite frequently in the panel. Fears of being judged, fears that we're not good enough, fears that we will lose our job. Some of these are very real fears, right? Fears that we may not be able to accomplish what we wanted to when we started off the year. One of my clients told me she wants to go back into a job. She wants to go back to the workplace, but even just going back there, she's overwhelmed. She doesn't know whether she should do it. Now, please type into the chat, fears. Is this something that you experience as well? Because I want to tell you, just like what was said in the panel, if you are feeling fear and you think that you are all alone, the truth is almost every one of us here today has some kind of fear. Okay, so one of our biggest obstacles is that we could be overwhelmed by fears. Now, the second obstacle is that we tend to self-sabotage. Now, if you look at this picture, you would see that what self-sabotage could. Yes, Evelyn, it's true. And later we'll be talking about how to deal with that fear, right? And they often call fear a negative emotion, but really it is just an emotion that tells you that there's something of threat or danger that's coming. Our interpretation of the fear is sometimes what gets in our way, okay? So self-sabotage, in this picture, you see so many red cherries, but picking up only the blue one. Self-sabotage represents behaviors or thought patterns that hold you back and prevent you from doing what you want to do. For example, a client of mine said, Shan, I'm in this job and I don't feel any passion for it. I don't like what I'm doing every day. I'm just going every day because it gives me money. But what if I want more than that? So I asked her, well, what do you want to do? Well, I found this other position within the company and I've been wanting to apply for it. And I asked her, for how long? She laughed guiltily. And she said, it's been a year and I know the position is still empty. And she said, and I asked her, what's getting in your way? And she said, will my boss think that I'm not loyal? Will they think that I'm fleeting? I'm not, Shan, really. But my priorities have changed ever since I became a mom. And so when she knew what that was, which were her thoughts, patterns that were holding to ask her boss if she could change. And because she asked, she was granted. And now she's working in a new department and enjoying it so much more. So self-sabotage could manifest itself as negative self-talk that somehow or other enters our mind. It could manifest itself as imposter syndrome, even though you have achieved a lot, even though objectively on the outside people view you as someone respectable, we still put all the doubt on ourselves. Now, how many of you experience that as well? Self-sabotage. Okay, please type into the chat if you relate to that as well. Right. Okay, so that's self-sabotage. Later we'll be talking about how we can deal with self-sabotage. Now the third one is giving up our power. So giving up our power, yes, I think many of you can relate to that one, huh? Yeah, so giving up our power is another thing that's possibly getting in our way. And giving up our power is allowing others to decide who you are, how you should be, how you should act, or how you feel. For example, sometimes we say sorry a lot when we don't even have to be sorry and it's got nothing to do with us. Sometimes we say yes when we actually mean to say no. Or maybe we're scrolling through social media and we see picture perfect examples of leaders that we want to be. And we look at them and say, I'm just not like that at all. In that moment, we have allowed others to decide who we are, how it should be, and how we feel. So giving up our power is the third obstacle that could potentially get in our way of building up our courage. So right now, I want to pull everything together. We talked about fears. We talked about self-sabotaging. We talked about giving up your power. And as I looked at the research and as I looked at these three, it dawned on me that actually it is a vicious cycle. When we feel fears, we are scared, we decide that maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe we decide, or an automatic thought comes in and say, I can't do this. I might as well give up. Or I don't know, this feels very scary. And then because of the thoughts that we have, because of the fear that we feel, which is emotional, that leads to us giving up our power and allowing someone else to decide how we should be and who we are. And because we've given up our power, we feel helpless. Some of us feel hopeless. Some of us feel there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Remember the lady who wrote to me? She asked me that question, is there still light? And sometimes if we are stuck in this vicious cycle, we can feel that it's a very, very challenging place to be. And what I want to do is, of course, not leave you hanging here. We are going to talk about how we get ourselves unstuck out of this vicious cycle and flex our courage muscles. But I also want to get a sense of what's real for all of you right now. So in a short while, the She Loves Data team is going to pull up a poll that's going to appear on your screen. And we'd just love to hear from you. Which part of the cycle is most challenging for you right now? And there are multiple, I think you can pick multiple options if I'm not wrong. So is it fears and anxieties and worries? Is it self-sabotage, or is it giving up your power? Which part of the cycle at this point is most challenging for you right now? And as you're answering, I've also put in my vote. And really, for me, the one that stands out, the one that I think is most getting in my way is self-sabotage. For instance, recently, I was asked to do a keynote speech, right? And the lady said, you know, Shan, in case of any technical glitch, can you please do a recording at home and then send it over to us? And in front of her, I guess, I said, yes. But then I had so many thoughts in my mind that came in. You don't know how to set up the screen at home. You don't even have a tripod. And you know, what if they see the recorded video and decide that they don't want you? I had all these intrusive negative thoughts that came into my mind. So I want to tell you that here I am as your workshop instructor, but I'm also human. Just like the panelists had mentioned, we are all human trying to live through what has been one of the greatest challenges that we've seen in recent years. So if I will be very honest with you, it is something that I also experience. But I'm not here to tell you that I'm invulnerable or infallible. I'm here to tell you that if you are stuck in some part of the vicious cycle, that there are ways, there are tools that we can use to get out of that rut and for us to rise and thrive. Okay, so let's look at the poll results. So fears and anxiety, 31%, it's pretty even, but we have self-sabotage and giving up power taking equal percentage. So I'd say that many of us are stuck in the cycle at some point. So as we go through each part of the solutions just in a minute, I really would love for you to take out your pen and paper and take notes, especially notes that will be relevant for the particular part of the cycle that you're in right at the moment. And if some of you say, Shan, all three parts are relevant to me, then well, you're going to walk away from today with lots of nuggets and tools that you can use. Okay? Are you ready to see and learn how we can get ourselves out of this vicious cycle? If you are, please type in yes. Evelyn typed in yes before I even asked you to type in yes. I love the energy. I love the energy here. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on, shall we? Thank you. So how can we overcome? I want to start with fears, right? Fears was 31%, you know, and just now, I think it was mentioned in the panel, that courage is a muscle that we can strengthen by use. And it's so true, right? Because if we think of it as a muscle, it is far more empowering than thinking we either have courage or we don't have courage. Many a times we think of psychological constructs as binary. However, a lot of what we do in psychology actually exists in the gray zone, and a lot of it can be cultivated. So each of the tools here is meant to help you to address each part of the vicious cycle, and really for you to pick and choose which are the ones that you perhaps will say, this is the one that I want to practice going forward from us, okay? So tackling your fears. I don't know how you feel about this, but whenever I mention this in any webinar, people tell me, Shan, I'm already scared. And if that's you, that's perfectly normal, right? Fear is a normal human emotion. The only thing we just want to be concerned about is when it gets overwhelming. So let me teach you the 3 steps to tackle your fear. The first one is to know your fears. Now, I mentioned earlier that sometimes one of our reactions to fear could be to run. Susan David, who is the author of the book Emotional Agility, says that besides running, some of us can bottle up our fear, which means we don't tell anyone about it. We suffer in silence, right? So she suggests that one of the best ways to tackle fear or any other challenging emotion is to get to know it, as if it is a friend that's coming to your house. For example, if I invited someone to my house, I would take an interest in them and ask them questions. How are you? Tell me something that really excites you. With our fear, we can also ask questions. Where is it coming from? What has triggered this fear here today? And the more we ask questions, the more we sit with it, our emotions, instead of running or bottling or withdrawing or distracting or even numbing our fears, the more we can find handles to know how to deal with the fears. But if we don't get to know our fear well, then how do we know what strategy to use? I know that maybe as you're listening to this in itself sounds very daunting, but that would be the first step that we should start moving on, knowing your fears. And you could do it by writing down some of the questions I said earlier. And maybe when the fear comes up, instead of judging yourself, instead of running from it, we can just jot down some of the answers that we have as to where the fears might be coming from or what the triggers might be. Okay. So knowing your fears. And then the second part is really learning how to manage your fears. Fears will come, fears will go. But in the moment when the fear is very intense, the very important part is learning how to manage it and reduce the intensity of it. Okay. And I want to bring to you a strategy that you can use. And we're all going to do it together. Okay, we're all going to do it together. Now, this practice comes from the field of mindfulness. So just get a pulse from the audience. How many of you have heard of the word or the term mindfulness? If you have, please type into the chat, yes. Okay. While I get ready my tools to lead you in a little mindfulness practice. Yes. Okay. All right. And for those of you who may not have heard about mindfulness before, mindfulness is simply being present and being aware in the moment and just being an observer of our inner world, our thoughts, our emotions, our body. Our body holds so much stress and tension that sometimes when I do this exercise and I tell my audience to relax their jaw, I literally see jaws dropping, because we have been holding it all up, and some of us actually feel it in our necks and our backs. Okay, so we're going to learn how to practice mindfulness. And if this is the first time you're doing it, the only thing you need to do is to just listen to my voice and follow along what I say. And if along the way you do get distracted or you do think of something else, we practice non-judgment and staying objective. We'll just say, oh, I'm wondering, and that's okay. Let me come back to Sharon's voice. Okay? All right, so if you're ready, everybody, I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes for this short little practice. And all you need to do is just listen to my voice. All right, everyone. In this moment, I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes and follow along with my voice. The first thing we're going to do is to pause. Whenever we experience fear or an intense emotion, sometimes it's a tendency to act straight on it. But in mindful practice, the first thing we do is simply to pause. We never give ourselves enough permission to pause in our busy life. And sometimes it contributes to more anxiety. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to invite you to give yourself the permission to pause and put everything down for the next 2 minutes and focus on you. The second part of the process is to take deep breaths. We're going to breathe in for 4 seconds and hold for 4 seconds. Breathe out for 4 seconds and hold for 4 seconds. And I'm going to count you through it. So let's breathe in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. And one more time, breathe in. 3, 4, and hold. 3, 4. Breathe out. 3, 4, and hold. 3, 4. Now the next part of the process, and please continue breathing this way in the background as we do observe. The first thing we're going to observe, as if we're standing at the window just looking at the clouds. We don't need to do anything. We just need to notice what's going on. The first thing is to notice our thoughts that's present for us right at this moment. Some of us may have nothing to think about, and that's totally fine. Just notice. The second part is to notice our emotions. How are we feeling right at this moment? Some of our emotions may be positive, some may be neutral, and some may be negative. Remember that all emotions you feel are yours. And it's okay if it's negative. You don't have to take it and put it in your pocket straight away. You just notice that. And the last thing is we're going to notice our body as if we're putting our body through a scanner, the bright lights shining at the top of our head. We're going to observe that bright light as it goes down the back of our neck. Just going to pause there to notice what's going on there. If you need to, you can move your neck around to bring some awareness to your neck area. And then observe as the light goes down your back, all the way down to your lower back. And pause. Then finally down to your knees, and then to your feet. Noticing along the way any areas and how your body feels as you pause. Now you have an idea of your thoughts, your emotions, and your body. And this is a point where you can make a choice. The last part of the process is to proceed. And that's to proceed with something that's helpful for you whenever you are experiencing stress or fear. What I recommend is to think of a word that's really going to help you to focus your attention on as you proceed on with the rest of your day. A focusing word that reminds you of how you're feeling right now. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's calm. What is that word? And just allow it to gently float into your consciousness. In a short while, I'm going to be ringing a bell. I just want you to open your eyes when you can't hear the sound of the bell anymore. Okay, everyone. Let's come back. Take one last deep breath and open your eyes. So that was a very short mindful practice to help you to manage your fears. And there were actually 4 parts to it: pausing, deep breathing, observing, and proceed. And I'd love to hear from you which part of the process was actually most helpful for you. Was it the pausing? Was it the breathing? Was it just being an observer without having to do anything? Or was it the last part, which is proceeding with a word that's helpful for you? Please type it into the chat. I'd love to know. Breathing, pausing, and being still. Diane, beautiful. Proceeding, pausing, nice, breathing. Yeah, you're very welcome, Evelyn. Yes, and whenever we feel our fears, sometimes we feel that we are out of control. But when we do this process, we gain awareness of what's in our inner space, and that gives us the ability to then make a choice about how we want to manage it and how we want to proceed. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful and useful for all of you when it comes to your fears and managing it. The last one then, now that you know your fears, now that you know how to manage your fears, is to face your fears. Now, I'm not talking about that you have to immediately take the leap like this lady, or that if you have a fear of spiders, that you put the spider right in your face. What I'm talking about is daily acts of courage. It was alluded to by Dr. Tanvi earlier. We tend to think of courage as taking great big leaps, but what if we were to break that down into just little daily acts? And what you can possibly do is to start by writing down a courage list. I know that all of us have lots of things that we want to do, but we are so scared to do them. And because we're so scared, we never get to do them. You know, in Bonnie Ware's book, 5 Regrets After Dying, they found that people regret more the things that they didn't do than the things that they did do. So I want to encourage you to face your fears, small fears, on a daily basis, to build up the courage muscle. If we want this muscle to be strong, we've got to exercise it. And the way to exercise it is to build it into our daily routine with daily acts of courage. Okay, so that's number one, tackling your fears. Now let's go on to how we deal with self-sabotage. Now, if self-sabotage is what we do when things don't go well, what I want to recommend is to self-elevate instead. Sometimes we wait for people to elevate us, but I honestly believe we can take it into our hands and elevate us by ourselves. So one of the things I'm going to recommend is to challenge your automatic negative thoughts. You know, those thoughts that come in that say, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I give up, this is hard. Yes, those are the thoughts that come in. We can't control, that's why they're called ants, automatic. However, what we can do is to shift our response by challenging it. For example, if we didn't do so well in a work project recently, and the automatic negative thought that comes in that says, I'm doomed, we can ask questions such as, is that a possibility? Or is that a certainty? Is that truth? Or is that something that I'm just believing and feeling right now because it's so fresh to me? Is that based on any evidence? And maybe there's an evidence that you didn't do so well. Then we want to ask the counter question, is there evidence that I have done well? You see, if we don't challenge, then we are saying that we're just accepting everything that comes our way. But sometimes our thoughts are very tricky and cheeky. It's like this little gremlin that tells us, you know, you can't do it, you can't do it, nah, 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 nah. But we can challenge it and say, hey, why do you say that? Let's look for the evidence. So the first step to self-elevate, challenge your ants. The second part is to have some compassion for ourselves. Now, we sometimes are our harshest critic and we take our failures so seriously. But if our friend failed, what would we say to them? We have far more compassion to give to the people in our lives that we reserve for ourselves. Self-compassion, according to Kristin Neff, who is the world's leading researcher in this area, defines it as extending the same kindness and caring as if your best friend were talking to you, or as if you're comforting your best friend. So if your best friend came up to you and said, oh my God, Shan, I totally messed up that, would you say, what? How could you? I mean, you always fail, you always mess things up, it's just so like you. Now, I feel so uncomfortable saying that because I could never say that to my friend. But some of us have no qualms about saying it to ourselves. So one of the ways to self-elevate, have compassion for ourselves, okay? And the last part for this segment is to really celebrate. Celebrate our strengths and our wins, because we are so good at knowing what we can't do that sometimes we forget that within us lies lots of inner resources, the strengths of character that we have, like leadership, humility, kindness, and the wins that we experience on a day-to-day basis that we kind of dismiss and say, that doesn't count. Okay, so we want to have a little practice now of how to celebrate our strengths and our wins. Okay, and we are going to go into small little breakout groups, and we're just going to share either a strength or win that we have with other people here on the webinar today. Okay, and I want to just thank the She Loves Data team for helping us to set that up. Okay, we're just going to do that for 5 minutes. Okay, so Richa, over to you.
Sure, Shine. Thank you so much for the session. All of you, please click on the button OK when you get a pop-up window. I'll split you guys in the breakout room.
While we're waiting for everyone to come back. Nice, signing a deal with a new client. That's awesome, Yana. I think one of the recent win that I had was actually, it's actually more personal. I've been on this journey with my daughter who's 12 years old, and one thing I've been trying to do is to hold back from talking too much. And so a win that I want to celebrate is that I didn't overtalk today. She's at the stage in her life, where she is wanting to have her space and she doesn't want to be nagged. I mean, who does, right? But I sometimes can't help my mummy self. So holding back from nagging is my little win. Tracy, work in progress, I'll tell you that. Some days I just go all full out 15 seconds or 15 minutes worth of it. Okay, are we welcoming people back from the rooms?
Yeah, I think when the time gets up, they will be back again. I still see there's more time. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Richa. Yes, sometimes small wins are much bigger than any other sometimes. And sometimes we think that we must wait for the really big wins in order to like pop the champagne and celebrate, right? But it's the little wins along the way that actually give us motivation to get to the bigger wins.
Okay, I think I can bring them back now.
Yes, please. Okay, let's welcome everyone back. Let's welcome everyone back. I hope you had a good discussion and met people and celebrated their strengths and wins with them as well. Okay, so just want to invite you to just quickly type into the chat, what is a strength or win that you heard? Don't need to name any names, just type it into the chat. What is a strength or win that you heard in your rooms? Please type it into the chat. Determination. What else? Resilience, nice. Showing up, yes, absolutely. Haha, we've got double of that. Positivity. What else? What are some of the other wins, our strengths that we have demonstrated? As you all were out in the room, we were having a little chat here as well, and we're talking about sometimes the small wins are the big things. In the current environment that we're going through, sometimes we think we need to wait and wait and wait. And sometimes along the way, we don't feel motivated because we are waiting for the big win to happen. But if we were to break that down into small little flag posts along the way and celebrate it along the way, we will be far more motivated to press on. Wow, beautiful. Thank you everyone for sharing, and I hope you had a good time connecting with the fellow ladies here today. So just want to end off with the last one, which is really on how to stand bravely in your power. Instead of giving it away, how do we stand bravely in our power? Now, the first thing is if we are always saying sorry or saying yes when we mean no, then what we want to do is to make an immediate shift in your language and your actions. And that requires us to be mindful about the times when we're saying sorry, when it's really not our problem, the times when we're saying yes instead of saying no. And how about our actions? Sometimes we don't have a camera on us, but if we were, sometimes when we are in threatening or what we perceive to be threatening environments, or where we don't feel confident, we actually have body language that looks different from when we feel that we know what we're doing. And a lot of it looks like crouching down, not making eye contact, trying to make yourself very small. So one of the things that we can start doing is to shift our language and our actions. Right? One of the very fantastic TED Talks I really advise you to watch is by Amy Cuddy, who talks about the power pose. We stand bravely in our power when we feel it in our body, and we demonstrate it with the way that we stand, which is looking straight, arms out, standing with legs wide open. Standing open with our legs, the power pose. Okay, the second thing is writing your own story. I mentioned earlier that some of us look left and look right and look at social media and think, hey, I'm not like that at all. But what if you could be in control and you could be the one writing your own story, grounded in your own values, speaking your truth, coming from your heart, the story of who you are. Courage is about that. So when we come together again in the next webinar, we're going to learn how to write your own story. And last of all, to find supportive communities just like what we're doing today. Sometimes in the downest of downs, we may think, this is just happening to me. I thought it was just me. And you know, one thing I've learned is that most of the time, if you're experiencing it, there will be so many other people experiencing it as well. And what we really need in that time is support, right? And we find it maybe sometimes not in our immediate families, but in communities where we value similar things, in communities where we can find a sense of belonging. And really in the research, communities contributes to collective resilience, the resilience that we need to continue to ride the waves in this sea of change. Okay, so to bring it all together, in summary, you know, we are experiencing uncertainty and change because of the global pandemic, and maybe even outside of that, there's already been change coming our way. And as a result, we may feel vulnerable, and that launches us into this vicious cycle of fears, self-sabotage, and giving up our power. And what do we need? Courage. Courage to show up, speak from our heart, tell our truth, tell our story. And how we're going to do that? We will tackle our fears, self-elevate, and stand bravely in our power. So that's all I have in terms of the content for today's webinar. And I really wanted to ask you, what is your biggest takeaway from today? What is your biggest takeaway from today? Please type it into the chat, everyone. What is your biggest takeaway from today? And please stay around for another 5 minutes, because I want to share with you how we are going to conduct the courage circles, and it will only take us just a few more minutes. Okay, nice. So courage is a muscle to be trained. Awesome. I hope you walk away from today training your muscle. Shift your language and stand in your power, Ashley. Face your fear. Yes, once you learn how to manage, it becomes easier to face it. Yes, tackle small fears first. Yeah, absolutely, Shilpa. One small thing at a day. Reclaim your power, control and manage your fears. Absolutely. Hey, self-compassion, maybe give yourself a little hug sometimes, right? Be your own best friend. Yes, you can't think your way out of fear. You have to flex that muscle. And I'm so glad, Evelyn, that you know that you're not alone in this journey, and that is a courageous way for everything. And I'm so glad you're here, all of you, because you have shown up and turned up. Nice. Wow, look at all the feedback coming in. When seen from others, it's motivating, gives you the push. You have a power over your fear. Celebrate your own wins. Celebrate your wins. Yes, so I hope that over the course of the next couple of days, you will have the attitude to celebrate your wins as well. Okay, so here's where we want to share with you a little bit more about what's coming up. and what the Courage Circles are about. As mentioned, there will be one in a couple of weeks. And then on 14th of August, we're going to webinar number 2, which is about Rising Strong. And that will be followed by another circle. So what exactly are these circles? In order for us to build a community, in order for us to have safe space for us to come together and have rich discussions and to learn and apply the things we've learned from today, we are going to hold 2 Courage Circles. The first on the 24th of July and the second on the 28th of August at the same time that we started today. Okay, and what you can expect is small groups of about 20 in a safe and intimate space where you can learn from each other, just like today, feel elevated by each other and recognize that you are not alone, that there is a community that can support you. And to do that, we have experienced facilitators. I'll show you them who they are in a minute, who will be there to be present and hold space. At the same time, ask you deep and powerful questions. Sometimes we are not good at asking ourselves these questions, and we need someone else to be able to shine the light on areas that we might not be seeing. Okay, so who exactly are your facilitators? Let me introduce. Besides myself, we have 2 beautiful ladies. First lady is Nicole, and the second is Yana. Now, Nicole is a coach, and she works a lot with women in the area of energy and well-being. And Yana is an adjunct lecturer at the School of Positive Psychology, and she's really passionate about resilience and psychological safety. So they are going to be together with me facilitating each of the circles so that we each have enough time to spend with all of you. Okay, so hopefully that's something you're excited about. Before the circles, there is a little bit of pre-work. We want also to provide a platform for you to cultivate your self-awareness. So we are going to ask you to do a little self-assessment from this amazing book called Positive Intelligence, which identifies for us our top 3 saboteurs, the way in which we self-sabotage. And I can tell you that even though I've been doing a lot of self-work over the last 15 years, when I did this assessment, I learned something about myself that I have been trying to pin down but never did. So we will be sending what to do in the assessment in the follow-up email. Aside from the assessment, we'll also be coming together with some reflection questions, right? So what are some of the obstacles that are getting in your way? How do you intend to overcome these obstacles? And, you know, kind of living in a double world, what would life be like if I didn't do anything about these saboteurs versus what would life be like if I did do something to overcome them? And we're going to come together in the circle to discuss these reflection questions. Okay, so hopefully that's you are clear on what's coming up. And as I mentioned, please stand by for a follow-up email from She Loves Data, which is titled Welcome to Our Courage Circle. All right, so from me to you, it has been a real pleasure this afternoon, and I would love to stay connected. So if you'd want to stay connected with me, here are just some ways in which to do so. You can find and connect with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, or if you are keen to check out the kind of work that I do with companies, you can go to my website, happinessscientist.com. I also run a free Telegram channel where I share tips that inspire and help women to break free from their fears, to find purpose and joy. And that's the QR code that you can scan there as well. Okay, so I want to thank She Loves Data, Informatica, and the team behind the scenes. They have been working so hard. We all have been, and really it started off with an idea. It started off with learning the data and the research, and the result is what we have today. So thank you. I think I'll hand it back over to Pat. Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you in the circles as well.
Thank you very much, Cheyenne, and to all the participants, thank you, and we'll see you again during the Courage Circles, the Courage Circle sessions. And again, thank you so much to Informatica, Dr. Tanvi, Yana, all our wonderful speakers for sharing their knowledge as well. So see you again, and have a good day. Bye.
Take care, stay safe.